One night he came to me and I could see he was very nervous. Something in my heart had told me that this would be important. I was really hurt and really angry. Yeah, I was devastated. I didn't believe that he could lie to me so badly. I couldn't accept cheating. I can't explain the feeling. It touched me on a lot of levels because, you know, I had come from living a life that was far from what the Lord was asking of me. I'm Sarah, mother of two, living in Tasmania. Yeah, I come from a lovely Italian family and I was raised and grew up Catholic. When I was 16, I joined a youth group. I was going to Mass on Sundays, but I wasn't really living the faith. I was probably a little bit rebellious in my younger years. At that youth group that I met Thomas. Together, and we were going to Mass most Sundays. In this youth group that we were in, you would have turns at leading a weekend, a boy and a girl. And so Tom and I were asked to lead a youth weekend together. And so we spent a lot of time together while we were trying to organise this weekend. And it was through spending time together and we got to know each other a little more. I was kind of living this really free, sort of rebellious life, and he wasn't living a model life. I probably wasn't the sort of girl that he wanted in a girlfriend at that time, but he was a nice guy. I could see he was different, genuinely kind. After a while, we started dating, and it was a good relationship.
God and the Catholic faith was never a huge part of my life. I did it more out of tradition and more to just go with my parents, but I didn't really have it in my heart.
Neither of us, we really knew our faith, or we were really living our faith, and I think I was looking to him for, I suppose, a love that he wasn't there to fill, and he had his own things going on. We both brought a lot of brokenness to this relationship.
Things just moved on from there. There was a lot of unclarity. And it got to a point where we sort of said, yeah, I guess we're going out now. So, and that was a wound in itself as well, because everything was really unclear, and it just moved forward. And very quickly in that relationship, because it was my first proper relationship, and because of the life I was living, it was very easy for me to push my boundaries.
It wasn't the healthiest of relationships. I had a pretty bad temper as well. We used to have a lot of nasty arguments about things that we would disagree on. But after a while together, I think it was 3 years, I was thinking it was heading for marriage, but he was just finishing university and he made plans to go, as he had always dreamed, and spend 6 months travelling Europe. Something in my heart had told me that this would be important, because we were thinking about marriage at that time. I was thinking, okay, well, this I think will make or break us. This will be a bit of a desert time for me. And I think if we last through this, then we'll probably get married when he gets back. Right before Tom was planning to go to Europe, there was the World Youth Day in Sydney in 2008. And both of us went to that together with our youth group. And during that World Youth Day, I went with this question of really wanting to know God, if he existed. And I remember we went to this talk together on the theology of the body. Just raised a lot of questions for us. But right after that, he went off to Europe. And I had all this time that I didn't have before, because I was giving him all this time. You know, we were just spending all our free moments together and watching movies and passing time and whatnot. But all of a sudden I had all this free time on my hands. And so it was time for things to sink in, and I started listening more to CDs on theology of the body. I started reading the lives of the saints. It was that time that a really beautiful priest came into my life, and he was sort of guiding me along. And it was actually those 6 months that Thomas was away, it was a real time of conversion for me. It was actually during that time that I really encountered the love of the Lord and the mercy of the Lord. I started to turn my life around. Those 6 months culminated in me going to do this youth leaders formation course. And yeah, it was during that time that I decided that all these things that were wrong with how I was living, I was going to cut them out. I was just going to give my life to Jesus. And I was so happy there, spending time in adoration. And that's all I wanted to do with my life. And then I started to think, oh, well, Thomas is in Europe, and I think at that time he wasn't particularly close to the Lord, and I knew he was off partying, and he was still living this lifestyle that we had been living together. He was living it overseas, and it was a bit of a problem because I didn't know what to tell him when he came back. And of course, during this time I was spending so much time at the feet of our Lord in adoration, and I was praying for Thomas.
Clearly my love for Sarah at the time wasn't very great because of the unhealthy relationship we're living, but also I was happy to go away for 6 months from her. When that came along and the opportunity came along, I remember I was going to take a 6-month trip, and one thing that was going to be hard for me, I thought, would be to be away from Sarah for 6 months. But to be honest, like I said, because I was so broken and wounded, that for me it was just about having fun over there and partying, and because I was able to do that, I didn't think I'd miss Sarah as much. I'd say that's basically why I still decided to go, even though we were in this relationship.
And I was talking to him occasionally. He didn't call all the time. When he came back from his Europe trip, I knew there were things that we had to talk through. Like, for example, we weren't living our relationship in chastity, for example. And I knew that he was using pornography. And so I remember one of the first conversations I had with him when he got back. You know, here I was just wanting to share with him all these things I had experienced when he was gone. And one of the first things I asked him, I said, Tom, I'd really like you to give up using pornography. He's like, well, that's ridiculous. I'm not doing that. No way. It's not happening.
The other wound I had that really affected me, I remember, was pornography. My best friend introduced me to it early on, and I remember him saying to me, every normal guy does it. And I remember that sticking with me because I thought, well, I want to be a normal guy, and if that's what normal guys do, then sure, so will I. And I did, and I didn't show much resistance, mind you. It was all quite easy to get into it eventually. But that started to spiral me in a downward spiral, because once I got into pornography, I started to get into the whole life of basically just pleasure, really, and parties and alcohol and all the things that come with that. I started to get into that type of lifestyle because it's sort of what I was taught with pornography, really. You've got to look after yourself, make yourself happy, please yourself, and that's basically what I was doing for a long time. So
I really believed that Tom loved me, but I could see that, for the first time I could see, well, actually, does he really? There's obviously, things he loves more, or things that he's attached to more, and is this actually the man that I can see myself marrying? And I remember even saying to him, and I think it was the same day, when I get married, I'd really love to pray the rosary with my family every day as a family. And he's like, that's stupid. He reacted actually really strongly against that, and we had a big argument about it. And this was kind of how the pattern continued over the next few months. I would trying to challenge him or encourage him or tell him things about how I wanted to live my life or how I wanted my family life to be. And he would just push back. He was so angry. I could see that. I remember on one occasion, it was his birthday. He wanted to go out to the city, but it was the first Friday. I wanted to go to Mass. And that was a big argument. And just he would come to Tuesday night adoration with me, and I could see how frustrated he was. Yeah, I was asking the Lord, what do you want me to do? And I felt that we were supposed to break up, but it was too hard because we were so far deep into this relationship. It was just too hard for me to break it off, and I think I did try a couple of times, but he would pull out things like, oh, well, if you break up with me, then I'm never talking to you ever again. And, you know, he was such, I loved him, I cared about him. I wasn't ready for him to be out of my life completely. I just felt that I wasn't supposed to be in a relationship, that I was supposed to be praying about where the Lord wanted me, and I just felt that the Lord was saying, break it off. So I remember one time praying, you know, Lord, if you want me to break it off with him, I can't do it. He really needs to stuff up. He needs to do something really wrong. But I remember at the same time I was thinking, but he wouldn't. He's such a good guy, he couldn't hurt me. He loves me. Weeks later, I remember I was feeling something wasn't right. I was actually, I think at the time, questioning Tom about a particular friendship that he had because I wasn't going out clubbing anymore. He would still go out clubbing on the weekends, and there was one girl who would always go, and I would think I was getting a bit jealous, and I was questioning him about her, and I could see as I was questioning him, he was getting uncomfortable, and I knew something was going on. One night he came to me, and I could see he was very nervous to tell me what he had to tell me. But basically, he had been cheating on me, and he told me the circumstances, what had happened, and then there were cases before that as well, and just how I had been completely oblivious, because, you know, I just didn't think that he could or would do anything like that.
I very quickly became a good liar, and I would do that to try to basically protect myself or make other people like me. It's mainly what it was. And I would do that so much that it became second nature. I remember it wouldn't even faze me when I would do it. And it got to a point where I didn't even feel guilty about it. I would just do it, and it was a normal thing. Our relationship wasn't very healthy. Because I was so far down into my sin and I was so broken, what I ended up doing was I ended up cheating on Sarah. And that was something I never thought I was capable of doing in my life.
It kind of shook the ground that I was on a little bit, because I was like, one of the things that I've always hated, even though I was living a morally questionable life myself, there were some standards that I set. One thing was that I couldn't accept cheating, and I knew that I wouldn't cheat on anyone. And also I really hated being lied to. And yeah, I didn't believe that he could lie to me so badly. I think I'd caught him out on white lies before, but I just didn't understand. It didn't add up to me. And the fact that he could have done these things and I had no clue, I didn't know how I could trust not just him or anything. Like any truth seemed a little bit shaky to me. So I kicked him out of the house, and you know, I'm sure there was screaming and whatever else. And I had time to go back to prayer, and I was really hurt and really angry, and yeah, I was devastated. And I think in one of those dramatic things, I told him, well, I've got all your stuff, come pick it all up. And he came over to my house, and I gave him all the things that I had that were his. And I said, you know, it's over, it's, you know, that's the end, because I knew that in that situation that a relationship had to be over. And I think I unleashed at him a little bit, but I saw him, he just broke down. Like, I saw how sorry he was. I just remember him like just falling to the floor, and he was crying. And I was just, I can't explain the feeling. I was just moved with so much compassion and so much love. It was almost like I forgot the offence, and he was this person who was broken, and this person who I loved, and I just wanted to comfort him. So I just remember I just went up to him and I embraced him, and I knew that wasn't of me. I knew because at that moment, I felt this. I can only describe it as divine love, because it was just this overwhelming sense of the presence of God, of God's mercy, and I felt like as though it was God's love and mercy flowing through me at that time. And it touched me on a lot of levels, because, I had come from living a life that was far from what the Lord was asking of me, and God was so merciful to me. And I think I understood at that moment as well how God forgave me. I felt like I had come to the Lord like Thomas had come to me that night, just broken and just so pitiful, and that love that God was showing me, the Father's heart in that sense.
It really did feel like the grace of God, to be honest, because it's not something that would have been easy for Sarah or anyone else to do, but I felt that that's what's happened. So yeah, I felt a real grace.
It was not me, because in the natural, I'm an angry person. I find it hard to forgive the smallest of things or move on from things. I hold on to things for a while, and the fact that very day that I was able to forgive him, it was honestly, it was God. Like, to me, it was a miracle. One of the experiences that I've had of the very real, tangible presence and the mercy and the love of God that I've experienced in my life.
When they came together, I could just see they were meant to be. They were meant to be for each other. They help each other grow in holiness. What I really love about Sarah is she is so sincere, and that she knows she's a sinner too. So that it wasn't hard for her to forgive Thomas, because she knows that she hasn't always lived, a pure life, and she loves Thomas. And when you love someone, to err is human, to forgive is divine. It's because she has a good relationship with God, she was able to forgive. That relationship is a relationship that's centered in Christ, and it's the only way a relationship will last. So there's plenty of times, opportunities we need to forgive, and the fact that she was able to start from the beginning.
So we broke it off, and we had to, at first, cut communication a little bit, which was difficult, but we had to go on our separate journeys. It was still very painful for me, even though I had forgiven him. There was all this hurt and mistrust and all these things coming up, and he was very understanding of that.
I felt a bit of peace, but also a lot of heaviness through what I had done and the way I was living, and especially through some of the things that happened in Europe. And I remember going to Mass, and then I remember singing hymns there that I used to sing in my youth group, and it was just a real beautiful feeling of sort of welcome and peace. And I really felt for the first time the Lord was guiding me in my day there, and I'd never experienced that before. And I remember after the Mass getting this strong feeling to go to confession and to be able to confess everything that I had done. And so after the Mass, I remember going, and I remember seeing this huge image of the Divine Mercy with the inscription, "Jesus, I trust in you." And I was really anxious when I was waiting there for confession. But I remember that image gave me a lot of peace and gave me the courage to be able to confess everything I had done. And so when I did go to confession, and I was able to confess everything. And after that, there was this huge and overwhelming feeling of peace, And I remember just as though I was floating on air. When I made the confession, both to God and then to Sarah, it was one of the hardest moments I've ever had in my life. But I know that it was only God's grace that allowed me to do that and to be able to confess in that way. And I also felt the same when I received Sarah's forgiveness. You know, when she did forgive me, it was basically the same day that I had confessed, which I didn't expect. And even though she broke up with me, I remember later that night I came by her house and she just embraced me. I remember, and that moment for me was one of the most incredible moments of grace, because I felt at the time like I was hugging Jesus, to be honest. I knew that I felt the forgiveness, and I felt this incredible amount of love, and I knew it couldn't have been Sarah. I knew that this love was the grace of God working through her. And I remember that moment was just such a beautiful moment for me. Even though she had just broken up with me and I was very broken, it was as though God's healing started straight there. And for me it was really beautiful. So I couldn't be more thankful for the way God's grace has worked and led me to the beautiful life and family I have now.
I realised that if I was going to get married, the man that I would marry would have to be a real man of the Lord. He had to be a man who was going to be able to lead me to heaven. It was going to be someone who could take that journey with me. During this period after Thomas had come back from Europe and while we were broken up, we were still walking together in friendship, and we were doing a lot of things for the church together. We continued to go to Tuesday night adoration, and we formed a friendship, and we were on this journey together of faith, and we had Tuesday night adoration, and I could see a real growth in him. I could see him changing. I think the moment I really saw it, he was leading a youth weekend again, like when we first met. Maybe he wasn't leading it, but he gave a talk, and I just remember hearing what he was saying in the talk and thinking to myself, wow, now that's a man that I could really entrust myself to. So I had asked the Lord to tell me what novena he wanted me to pray about, whether Thomas and I should get back together. And Thomas comes to my house being like, can you join me for this intention and this 54-day rosary novena? I wanted an answer quicker. I was hoping for a 9-day novena, but I agreed to pray for this intention with him, and then I thought, well, I'll have this secret second intention, which will be for our relationship. So we started praying that novena together, and it was, the first half of the novena is praying for this intention, and the second half is thanksgiving for the intention being answered. And I remember it was halfway through this novena where I had this realization while I was listening to Thomas give this talk, that is a man that I could entrust myself to. That is a man who I could walk with on the path to heaven. So after that time, I remember praying about it and being like, well, Lord, it's really hard, but I knew God had transformed Thomas's life, as I knew he had changed my life. I had confidence in that because I had seen where we had both been and where we both were. And I said to the Lord, okay, but if we're meant to be together, I had 3 conditions. I was like, I really want to be able to pray with him every day. And I don't want to just be dating with no purpose. I feel like we need to be both discerning marriage actively. It wasn't long after that that we ended up getting engaged. And I just remember always being really grateful when I would look on our relationship and where we'd come from and what we'd been through. I just remember being really at awe of the mercy of God and just how powerful it was. And so when we were choosing the date to get married, we chose the Eve of Divine Mercy Sunday.
Marriage has to be one of forgiveness and love. He said, love one another as I have loved you. And he forgave us before we even said sorry. God says, that we must be like him. And that's real love. And so for married couples, if they can't forgive each other, truly, how much do you love? Peter said, how many times do I have to forgive? 7 times? And Jesus said, not 7 times, but 70 times 7. Always. Now, when you make that commitment at the altar to love one another. It is till death do us part. And, you know, this is so important because this is where we really learn about love. And, you know, that it's often not having to, you don't have to die for it like Jesus did, but he's just asking little ways to forgive every day. We're not perfect. You know, we are broken human beings and we all have weaknesses in certain areas of our life. And, you know, you're going to have a weakness that the other person doesn't have. And so you've got to love each other in those weaknesses and help each other. And that's mercy.
Yeah, there have been some other times where when we shared our story, people have sort of come up to us and have said that it's inspired them to go to confession, for example, or to be able to speak to someone about forgiving them for something and similar things that may have happened for them. And so I know that a lot of people have spoken to us about how they've received a bit more hope in being able to get through certain situations or being able to return to God and have that relationship with Jesus again. So it's been really touching to hear that, because essentially anytime Sarah and I share our story, that's what we want. We just want other people to see how Jesus has worked through us.
Really, you know, he just has a love for the young people and he really wants them to know and love their faith. The biggest thing is that he's a man of prayer. He really takes everything to God.
For me, even though I suppose it was a big thing to forgive, that day that I forgave Tom, I knew that it wasn't me in that moment. It was an extraordinary grace. To be honest, it's the smaller things that I've found harder to forgive, and it's because forgiveness doesn't always come easily, and it is oftentimes very much an act of the will. Even though I had forgiven at that time, I knew that trust had to be rebuilt, and even after we got married, it wasn't like that had never happened. You know, the mercy of God and how powerfully he's worked in my life. And I know I'm different from the person I was. And in the same way, I know Thomas is different from the person that he was. And so I know that none of us are beyond the transforming power of God's mercy.
Shalom World Television is coming to Australia. This is a great gift. It's been gifted to many parts of the world, and now it's our Australian turn to receive it with open arms. I welcome it, I bless it. It's going to really support family life, married life, youth, give us a resource that we know that we need really great help in these areas. May Almighty God bless this new resource coming to our land, in the name of the Father, the Son and the Holy Spirit. Amen.